Welcome to Sync Up, a show about OneDrive, the intelligent files app for Microsoft 365. We are your hosts, Ankita and Jason Moore. I am Ankita product manager on the OneDrive team.
And I'm Jason Moore, Group Program Manager for OneDrive. This show will take you behind the scenes of OneDrive, shedding light on how OneDrive connects you to all of your files in Microsoft 365 so you can share and work together from anywhere while protecting your work from accidental loss and malicious attacks.
Today, we are excited to have on the show Olga Dalecka to talk about the new feature Add to OneDrive.
Don't go away. We've got another great show today.
OneDrive is a foundational product in our effort to build a seamless connected files experience in Microsoft 365, cutting across a lot of Microsoft products so you can access your files from most endpoints like Microsoft Teams. And we understand that finding content is one of the biggest inefficiencies we have on a daily basis. But with OneDrive, we want to help you quickly find the files that you need and care about the most. And to that effect, we have recently released a brand new feature called Add to OneDrive. And what the feature is and how it can help you is exactly what we're going to talk today with our guest, whom, Jason, can you please introduce?
Our guest today is Olga Dalecka. Olga is a senior program manager for OneDrive and works on making it easier for you to find your files. She loves item keeping, shared controls, and debating about breadcrumbs. Hi, Olga. Welcome to the show.
Hi. It's great to be here on my debut of Sync Up.
So to kick off today's podcast, Olga, why don't you tell our listeners what is Add to OneDrive, the feature?
Yeah, so Add to OneDrive is something that we built because today when someone shares a file with you, you have to remember who shared it with you and how they shared it. And if you've ever tried to get a big group of people to align on any one decision, you know that it's a big uphill battle to get everyone to share content in your preferred way so that you can find it again the most easily. Instead, what we built Add to OneDrive for was so that you can find shared folders in your OneDrive and you can organize them in a place that makes sense to you. So that instead of like me asking Jason, hey, when you shared that file with me, did you use the sharing dialog or did you paste a URL in Teams or did you send me a link in email? I can just find the folder once, add it to my OneDrive, organize it how I want in my OneDrive, and then it makes it really easy for me to get back to the folder that Jason shared with me in a way that makes sense to me. So that then I can just spend more time working, less time, contemplating how Jason decided to send me a file because it's Tuesday.
That sounds pretty accurate, actually. I feel a little seen in that one. So, Olga, I think that's a great overview of the feature, and folks will make sure to link to the blog posts about this so you can read more and kind of delve into it. But I think something that you won't find in that blog post that might be interesting to some of our listeners is knowing a little bit like, how did we come to building this? Like, what was some of the inspiration? What were the things we were trying to achieve in getting after it?
Yeah, so Add to OneDrive is something that we've actually wanted to build for years. That was one of the first things that I learned about when I took on the work to PM this feature, were people's war stories from like 5 years ago when Ed Averitt tried to build this, or 4 years ago when Omar Shaheen, a name you might recognize, tried to build it. But at that time, like the logistics just didn't work out or the math just didn't work out for it to be something that was viable to build at the level of quality that we wanted. And one of the big things that Files on Demand unlocked, in addition to being able to sync down your entire OneDrive without eating up your entire device's hard drive, was the ability to have access to all sorts of shared content without being limited by the space on your physical machine. So once we had Files on Demand, we saw that we had this huge opportunity to build Add to OneDrive in a way that was performant, easy to find, and easy to scale across not just a single device, but across all of a user's devices and everywhere that they access their OneDrive files. So once we had that architectural groundwork laid, we are able to deliver on Add to OneDrive, which is something that we've heard customers asking about for like years. The user voice has had thousands of requests. So we are excited to finally have the opportunity to get after it.
I think the user voice one in particular is a great point. Like, this is not hopefully to those of you who followed along, maybe you upvoted, you're not surprised that we're getting after these things that you've told us you want us to get after and you think is going to be incredibly valuable to you and your organization. I know, Ankita, you probably have similar stories. I've certainly had folks come up to me at conferences and ask, hey, what are you going to build this? When are you going to do it? And I think it's worth noting we have a similar feature, an Add to OneDrive today in our consumer product and offering that we've been able to learn a lot from. And so that makes it, doubly kind of interesting to us and kind of exciting to know that we can bring some of those learnings to the fore on that.
Yeah, that is a cool story. So I would like to dig a little further, Olga. What were the roadblocks while developing Add to OneDrive?
Probably my favorite story about building Add to OneDrive, which has become like one of my favorite stories about working on the OneDrive team, was that when we started building Add to OneDrive, we would have these meetings with all of these like engineering managers across the org and across other orgs. Like we had assembled this like, Justice League of OneDrive talent across like sync and web and the sharing space and the back end. And like we had all come together in these like 12 people rooms to be like, how do we do it? Like how do we essentially tackle this problem of introducing a new verb in our product in a way that doesn't stomp on users' expectations or get them stuck in a place where they don't quite know what the feature is going to do. We spent hours going into the weeds, right? Of like, what happens if, I shared a file with you and then you added it, but it was in some super restricted team site. And then like I moved it into a folder that then reshared it. And there was this point where we had whiteboarded the flow and the engineering director in charge of our whole sharing architecture was like, if we want to build this, we're going to have to rethink how our entire sharing model works. And then he paused for a few seconds and he was like, okay, let's keep going. Like, let's figure out how this is going to work, right? And you would think that the person who was responsible for that entire architecture, would have led that pause lead to reconsidering the timing of the feature or reconsidering the viability of the feature. But like in this, Justice League of engineering talent, it was just like, okay, cool, let's talk about that. Like, let's see where this can go. And I think it's really easy to kind of get caught up on roadblocks or caught up on challenges for features that are super broad. For landing Add to OneDrive, we had to take dependencies on teams like across the company and across the org to say like, how does search work? How will cross-scope move work? How will this work in Office and Teams? And it was a huge undertaking. And at any point, any one of those partners could have been like, we can't help you out with like search. But instead, we are able to partner in all these places and come up with solutions that didn't just work for one endpoint that you could search from, but instead worked across anywhere that you can search from by partnering with these teams and figuring out how to build these architectures that would scale to what the user expected. I think anytime you're building a verb feature, like a verb scoped feature, that verb is really only as good as how complete its solution is. So if you have like fragmentation in terms of where that verb works and how that verb works, you're really eroding user trust. So we really held ourselves to not only a high quality bar for the feature, but a high robustness bar for like everything that the feature had to be able to do out of the gate for us to kind of earn the right to have customers trust it.
It's a great one Microsoft story, right? Like that notion kind of I love Justice League as imagery there, kind of people coming together for it. And I think, you mentioned early on, like we've started and looked at this as a project several times in our history. And the fact that it's been a bit of a challenge in that kind of comes from so much of it being this complex interweave of both work inside of OneDrive and SharePoint, as well as all these partnerships coming together. So I'm really excited that that's actually happened and is coming together with it. Something that folks may not know, though, is that we've actually been running this in a private preview for a little while. And we've had a number of customers that have been living with it and sharing feedback. Do you have any like specific things that have popped out of that, or big learnings or surprises that would come out of customers actually playing with this before we launch it?
Yeah, one of the things that we kept going back and forth about on the feature was essentially how to decorate added folders. It was something that came up as a theme a lot in our user research, where we thought it was important for users to be able to differentiate added folders from their own folders so that they would understand, like, this thing isn't really yours. We're just keeping it here for you so you can find it more easily. And we tried probably dozens of different like icon permutations and different command permutations so that users would, kind of connect, hey, the reason that this folder is decorated this way is because it means something else. But we couldn't crack it, no matter how many link icons we tried or how many little shortcut icons we tried. Like, it just wasn't immediately recognized.
How many shortcut icons did we try?
The user research is funded out of a different department. Like, you don't need to really worry about it. We were very thorough. But it was a lot, and it was something that when we wound up talking to customers, they're like, I see what you're trying to do here, and I also see the problems of it. So instead, they wound up pushing us towards like an owner column. The thing that we were trying to convey with iconography was only really meaningful with additional words and context. So that was one of our big learnings where it was like, this is the actual need that we have. So one of the conversations that we had with a customer as we kicked off private preview that was super enlightening for the team was that we weren't just talking to end users. They had assembled kind of representatives across people in their company who did like deployment and education and IT management and like handled tickets. And they wound up giving us a ton of actionable feedback in terms of making sure that our system was not only easy to understand and clear and transparent about the actions, but also making sure they had a lot of great ideas about how we could make sure that we get usage and adoption after we had deployed the feature. And a lot of that came back to this sort of idea of like building trust by making the user aware of the consequences up front. And that led us to revisit a lot of like our dialogues and workflows for saying like, okay, well, if we're going to inform the user that this happened, like what's the right moment to inform them so that it's not a surprise, but it's also not an unnecessary amount of alarm. One of the cases that we went back and forth on that the feedback from this customer really helped us with was the example where you added a folder from someone else's OneDrive or from a shared library, and then you lost access to it, right? Maybe the person deleted it. Maybe they just revoked your permissions to it. But
yeah, what happens?
Right. At some point, at some point, my access disappears. But users are very uncomfortable if folders in their OneDrive just disappear, right? Because they don't have any way of figuring out why that happened or what happened.
Right.
But it's still important in that case for you to explain like why the customer doesn't have access. So the experience that we settled on was that when you lose access to an added folder, the folder still stays in your OneDrive. But when you navigate into it, we show you an access denied screen and prompt you to remove the shortcut. This is one of those cases where we thought we were being so responsible and proactive by just like cleaning things up on behalf of the user.
Right.
But it's kind of like the experience of like not hiring the housekeeper who cleaned your house. One day you just come home and everything
comes and cleans up for you.
Right. You're like, that's very alarming. But a clean house is delightful.
I will be on the lookout for my house randomly being cleaned. I'll be nervous. I will try to appreciate it if that happens in the future. But it's funny. I was just thinking, like, I'm curious, Ankita, Olga, for your experiences. But there's two examples. I've been self-hosting it for a while now, and there's two examples for me that have been really killer in using Add to OneDrive. The first is we have a weekly team meeting, and we have a Teams team for that team, and there's a folder and channel in there that's got all our weekly presentations. We make a new presentation every week that has everything there. So things like when someone joins the team, they can actually go back and browse all of that stuff. And I usually once a week have to go in and create the new folder from the template and work with the speakers, make sure their content gets in. And mounting the subfolder that's just for the presentations into my OneDrive makes that so much easier. I just go to my OneDrive, go in there, copy it, and boom, I've got the newest one there. I'm already ready to go. It's such a simple thing, but it's made my life so much easier. I really, really appreciate that. And it was a really great way of using Add to OneDrive, was getting back to that content all the time. The other one that I do a lot is we have a quarterly checkpoints. If you are followers of Jeff Teeper on Twitter, you're used to seeing photos, for example, from Jeff every quarter when we sit down and talk with Jeff about how the business has been doing, what we're doing with the products, and what are the big exciting things we're doing next, whether that's for people at home and consumer usage or work and educational usage for OneDrive, SharePoint, and more. We actually have a folder that's got all of our quarterly checkpoints in them. And I often refer back to them. I find it really useful to be able to go back and find that thing and say, hey, what did we write about that? What was the pitch we made for that? Or what was the state of the product across those things? What's the data? They're great pickled examples of where the plans were. And so that's another one that I mount using Add to OneDrive into my OneDrive so I can easily and quickly just navigate to that, whether I'm on my phone, on the web, or even via sync. And that, to me, is a really, really powerful tool to be able to have and leverage. I don't know if you are using Add to OneDrive in the same ways, but I'd be curious what you've gotten out of it so far in self-hosting it.
I was just saying that I have added the sync up folder to my OneDrive to get to it easily every month. So that is helpful. But I was also wondering if there are certain end user scenarios, Olga, that you are aware of. Something like one scenario was actually I spoke to a customer, so I'm not sure how much it would resonate with everyone, but like marketing creates a lot of decks and assets that are being used by sales rep. And it would be very easy for sales representatives to kind of add that folder that marketing probably might be sharing with all the sales rep to their OneDrive so that it's easy for them to keep accessing that folder whenever they need the decks or any customer presentation or assets that they can access and use to pitch the product or pitch to have their sales pitch with the customer. So that was one that I heard and I felt, yeah, it might resonate with folks beyond that particular organization. But when you were working with different organizations, were there any such examples across different functions that you realized that, yeah, I did not think of it and this can be used in a helpful way?
Yeah, I think that in terms of when we talked to customers, there wasn't necessarily like one sort of killer scenario which came up. A lot of what we heard was, man, the location where I put stuff now is really important. The location where other people choose to put stuff is really important. And that, in some of these cases, they were trying to govern these important decisions by having like these very crisp processes that say like, in this case, put it here. And this is when you make a team site. And this is when you find like a new home for it and it grows up out of your OneDrive to go into this new place.
That power of I'm not rearranging all these organizations and everyone else. I'm allowing those and then I'm making it work for me is really, really critical.
Yeah, like that process is really powerful if everyone's doing it. But I think anyone who's ever managed a process knows that the challenge isn't designing the process. The challenge is sort of managing everyone else using the process.
Right.
And in this case, that kind of falls away, right? Like you can choose to put it wherever. Hopefully you make good choices. Hopefully everyone makes good choices. But if you don't agree with that choice, you aren't impacted. Like you don't have to remember if that other person made the choice according to the process or made the choice according to, where they decided to put stuff because it's Jason Moore and it's a Tuesday.
You know that Tuesdays are team site Tuesdays.
Obviously. There's, so much alliteration opportunity. And then Teams is Teams Thursdays.
That's right.
But the example that I found, which is, I guess, kind of surprised me, was that for my collaboration and storing documents, I pretty much exclusively use OneDrive. Like I'm a very weak SharePoint user.
Oh, I see.
I'll put stuff in the spec library when Jason tells us that we need to put stuff in the spec library.
Spec library. Yeah, it's important.
That's what I hear. But I don't really venture outside of my OneDrive bubble. I guess my most meta example for add to OneDrive, I had like an alias set up for a long time called add to OneDrivers, where like I would email status updates and email documents to people who were either on the feature crew or on the LT or people with just a fascination about getting status updates.
Right. President company included.
Right. Just all email all the time. But one of the things that I felt empowered to do once I started dog fooding the feature was moving this like corpus of work outside of my OneDrive and into the SharePoint team site that got created when I created that alias in Outlook. Because now like I can get back to it in just as many clicks. I know that everyone who has access to the Add to OneDrivers group has access to that content. And it went from being something where I was sort of drafting these status updates alone and sending them out to now being able to have it in a place where people can go back and reference them. They can find the notes from our meetings. And it's not in the same way that it's not like limited to another person's organizational structure and decisions. Like they aren't handicapped by my decisions of keeping things like very private and very like focused on my own, individual productivity and ease of finding stuff. I guess the TLDR is that add to OneDrive made me more of a SharePoint user.
I love that. Yes. This is goodness. This is goodness all aboard.
That was unexpected for me.
So finally, Olga, what is your vision for Files experience in Microsoft 365?
It's a great question. It's also a really big question. So one of the things that I work on, Jason kind of mentioned at the beginning that my, loves include arguing about breadcrumbs and shared controls and making it easier to find files. So a lot of what I work on is sort of this idea of how can you make finding files a coherent and flexible experience. Microsoft and our M365 products specifically are an offering that reach so many people with so many different styles of working that it becomes really hard to be prescriptive about like, well, this is the best experience or this is the best combination of products because people don't have, people have different needs. They want different flexibility. They have different habits and patterns, right? And our job as people who build software is to adapt to those patterns and make sure that there isn't anything in their experience that's like degraded by which Microsoft products they're choosing to use that day. So a lot of like what I work on is figuring out, and a lot of where I think the future of coherence is going is to figure out how to start to align and streamline all these experiences across all of our different products. If I have to relearn how to find files in Outlook and relearn how to find files in Office and relearn how to find files in Teams, I find that silos people because they're only going to want to relearn that product when they're in the right, mindset to want to put forth that energy. And anything that we do to remove those obstacles by making experiences feel more coherent and consistent and lower that learning curve for jumping across products is something that's not only great for us as a company, but also for our customers to be able to, use whichever products they want with confidence, just like Add to OneDrive lets you put files wherever you want with confidence because you know how to get back to them. We hope that you'll know how to find files in all these other products. Big dreams, mostly powered by shared controls. Lots of arguments about details for like how do we make these huge verbs like open and save and insert and attach across all of these products like powered by one experience. It winds up being like a pretty big job. But I think that's definitely the direction that we need to go to for us to not only have like our users be successful, but frankly, to be able to like meet users where they want us to be.
That's so cool. Jason, I have a question for you. Taking off from what Olga was just describing, I wanted to get your views that because you've been with the product since its birth. I mean, I wanted to know that whatever your vision was for Files experience or for the product, how much do you see the team and the product evolve on those lines, and especially with a feature like Add to OneDrive?
It's a great question, Ankita. There's of course the temptation to be like, this is all as we have envisioned. From the first day, there were tablets that described OneDrive, and never did we have to change anything in our plans whatsoever. But the reality is that the best part, in my experience of working on OneDrive and being part of the journey, has been the ongoing conversation about where and how it should evolve. When we started the team, Teams didn't exist. In fact, at the time, I think Windows Live Messenger was the largest IM system in the world, and was the way all the hip young people chatted and caught up. And so the world has changed quite a bit. We're in a very different place as a result of that. But frankly, that's been kind of the thing that makes it interesting, is there are fundamentals that are true. Fundamentals are things like, files, folders as a computing concept have stood the test of time pretty well. There were some of the few core computing concepts that are rock solid today, just as much as they were when they were invented, back in the 1950s. But at the same time, so much has changed about where and how these things need to be productive for us and to journey with us as human beings and with us as organizations and groups of people doing things. So something like Add to OneDrive to me is both a natural evolution, but also very much in part of continuing to innovate and make sure that the products, that these experiences are keeping up with what people want and need. And so the development of them really comes down to the customer feedback, whether it's through user voice or meeting someone at a conference or watching people use a product from behind a one-way mirror. All of those things kind of come together to help inform us on that. There is the innovation of things we want to see in the future and the places we think we can go with them. And then, of course, just the things that become happenstance. The industry evolves and changes, and we learn from each other across it. All of those, I think, come together to kind of bring us to where we are today. And so when I look at the history, I kind of see it in the context of that evolution and those forces pushing and pulling on each other as we move forward.
Awesome.
Well, that's kind of the end of our time today with Olga. Thank you so much for being on the show, Olga. We do have one last question, our kind of like fun corner question. And today, what I wanted to hear about from each of you is, what are you most proud of in your garden? It's summer, and our team, Olga, in particular, we're talking a lot about what we're doing in our gardens. But I'm curious, what are you most proud of in your garden today? And Ankita, I will just say, it doesn't have to be plants you've grown, as we know that may have been a challenge.
I don't have a garden. I have a nice sized patio because I live in downtown Seattle, and it's full of artificial plants that look really real and make me feel really happy and green whenever I look at them, because I look at them from a distance, and from a distance it looks great. And I don't have to be constantly afraid of killing them because they are artificial. So yeah, I am happy about them.
I respect that. I think artificial plants have their place, and I appreciate that they bring you so much joy. How about you, Olga?
So I, for a long time, had a notoriously black thumb. I tried to raise succulents for a while, and I don't know how much everyone knows about like succulent gardening, but most of the advice on the internet is essentially to aggressively neglect them.
Ankita, take notes.
Yeah.
So it's like barely water them, right? Just forget about them for 3 months.
Wow, these are my plants.
They still die, right? And I'm like, how did I not neglect it enough? Like, did I have too much of an attachment to the succulent? Didn't sense it? And like, it fled my expectations by fleeing the mortal plane? Like, I don't know. But I got a basil plant a few weeks ago, and I'm happy to report that it's still alive.
Excellent.
I have found the right balance between care and neglect for basil.
You just need to find other plants that fit that window, and you're perfect.
Right. So like, I'll remember to water you like every other day or sometimes every day. It is kind of great because my boyfriend had got a house that used to be a gardener's house. So it just has beautiful plants and shrubs in the backyard. And one of the things that's in the backyard that's sort of my favorite plant are his raspberry bushes. And every time someone asks him about them, he's like, they just grew. They just here. I can't kill them. They just keep growing on their own. I don't do anything. I just, walk up every few days and get raspberries. And I'm like, that is life.
And clearly, Jason, you wanted to flaunt your gardening skills, because of which I asked this question. Yeah, come on, go ahead.
It's very important I state that when I'm talking about our garden, I am representing my family and household, and I am not misrepresenting my particular portion of contribution to that. But if you asked me before last week, I would have said I've been most proud of our blueberries because I love blueberries, and it's awesome to live somewhere where we can grow blueberries in our backyard. They're like my favorite fruit, so it all works out really well. But we have now officially grown potatoes. We have grown potatoes, and I am super proud of our potatoes because we showed them an extreme amount of neglect this year. And we went away for 3 weeks and they still survived. And we had our first round of those potatoes last night, and they were delicious. And so I'm incredibly excited about our potato work. I'm looking forward to the new crop. Maybe I'll share photos of those with you guys. But those are pretty exciting.
I feel like there's a real opportunity for neglectful gardening.
Yes.
We just need to capitalize on right now.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone's listening to the podcast going like, oh my God, it's not that hard. What are you people talking about? Please, at Ankita_Kirti21, just let her know.
I literally have fake succulents because I'm so scared of even going that route. But yes, this podcast was all about Jason and for Jason so that he can flaunt his gardening and his carrots and his potatoes, because clearly both of us, Olga and me, didn't have much great stories.
That's fine. I'll just keep looking.
I'll come back to you, Jason, with a very interesting question next month.
Oh, excellent. I look forward to it.
Jason went to great lengths to set up an opportunity to talk about his garden, though.
These are long-term investments with plants, so you got to. All right. With that said, we are out of time with Olga today, and we need to wrap it up. So, lastly, for our audience, Olga, how can people find you and learn more about you?
So I am on LinkedIn, and I am also a pretty frequent speaker now at the Microsoft Ignite and the SharePoint Conference North America conferences. So I'll be there virtually in September, and I look forward to connecting with you all there.
Awesome.
Oh, and next week we have a webinar on Add to OneDrive, and Olga would be there as well.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for being on Sync Up, Olga. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Olga.
Next up, roadmap updates, so don't go away.
So it's time to share with the listeners the latest feature releases. But today I'm not going to much talk about what we released in the past month. I am also going to share a lot of features that we announced this month that are going to be rolling out in the next couple of months and the next 2 quarters. So if you haven't already, we released a blog post on Microsoft 365 blog that was basically introducing new features, new OneDrive features that can help you share and collaborate across work and life. And we will be adding the link to the blog in the show notes and in the blog. The primary feature that we announced was Add to OneDrive, which we just discussed about. But apart from that, we also released the team sharing integration, where now you can have seamless sharing experiences in Microsoft Teams. We will also be releasing sync metadata support to OneDrive Sync app, which would support read and write sync for shared libraries that contain required metadata. Another feature that has been requested on user voice. This month, we'll start rolling out move and keep sharing. So now when you move a file between your folders in OneDrive or from OneDrive to SharePoint, you will get the option to keep the sharing permissions while you move. Last month, 100 GB file updates became generally available to everyone across the globe. So now you can upload large file sizes, large file types like 3D CAD media files, and previously released differential sync will expedite the upload process for such large files. Other few features that are coming up are the ability to mute comment notifications and the ability to share the URL from your address bar. A very cool feature that we announced this month was sync admin reports. So with Sync admin reports, you would be able to gain visibility and insights on the adoption and health of your Sync app across your organization. This is a very critical feature for the OneDrive admins. We also released a couple of enhanced file protection and governance features like Microsoft Information Protection, sensitivity labels, automatic classifications with sensitivity labels, and sensitivity labels for SharePoint sites, and finally, my favorite, information barriers. And in future, to streamline admin experience, we are going to be converging the OneDrive Admin Center with the SharePoint Admin Center. So you will have one universal admin center that will help you access all the controls for both OneDrive and SharePoint. There were a couple of feature announcements for OneDrive Personal as well, mainly around family and group sharing, which would make it easier for you to stay connected with your family. And to read about all these new features and announcements, please refer to our blog that is present in the show notes. For more information on all these features, do check out our blog at aka.ms/OneDrive/blog. So, Jason, this month, what do you have for the special topic?
Well, this month I thought we'd switch gears a little bit and talk about something I've only recently learned about, but I really enjoyed learning about. Have you ever been on a project or worked on something and had stuff just go sideways?
Obviously, who hasn't?
Well, sometimes when that happens, not everybody says, hey, I'm accountable here. Not everyone takes ownership, and it can be a little frustrating, whether it's playing the blame game or the way I always think about it is like at the house, sometimes I'll come in the kitchen and there's a mess. And when I go in and ask in a very friendly, open way to family members, what happened in the kitchen? It turns out that the person who did it was I didn't do it, our newest family member. And that's, kind of an example of, people blaming something else.
If this is about the one time I left a coffee cup in your office again.
No, it's not about that, although you did. But this is really about a framework to talk about how to deal with accountability. And I've heard it called a couple of different things when it was introduced to me. One is the accountability ladder or the ladder of accountability, amongst other terms. But at its most basic level, it's a tool for how to talk about and then deal with the stages of dealing with something.
Like the different stages of grief, denial, anger, acceptance.
Exactly like that. And it's really more of a work context. And it's about how you positively transform in recognition of those things. So you see, the first half of the ladder is all about the things that are kind of being unaccountable. It's finding reasons and excuses to not be accountable, where you don't take accountability for it. And the 4 stages that they talk about there are 1, denial. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Hey, I didn't do it, or it's not happening. Blaming. Well, if so-and-so had done their job right. Excuses. Well, this market, we couldn't have done anything, with those cases. And then kind of what's often called waiting or wait and hope, it's kind of like, hopefully someone else is going to make this problem go away.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like all the unaccountable things.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I do all of them. So all of these are counterproductive.
Right, exactly. And it's okay. We all do all of them. And you can see why they're all about externalizing issues. It's always about something else, not myself, not internalizing it or the actions I can take. And so you kind of think about it as they're all about not being in control. And thus you can't be accountable.
So I assume the next part of the second set would be about being in control.
Absolutely. And asserting that control. So once you've passed through those 4 stages, there's acknowledging the issue or the reality, kind of saying, yeah, things are broken right here. Owning the problem. Hey, I'm responsible for this issue, or I'm responsible for fixing it. Then there's finding and creating solutions. So going and saying, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? What can be different? How can we solve that? Maybe we could clean up the mess we made in the kitchen or the coffee cup. And then, of course, implementing those solutions, actually going and taking care of them. And those are all about how you kind of see that progression from beginning to confront the issue or the problem to all of the steps necessary to actually fix it and getting to actually fixing it.
Okay, so how do I use this so that I don't fight with my husband about who does the dishes?
Right. Well, I don't know if this will help you, but maybe. The basic version of it is really keep in mind that this is about you working with others. So, where are you on the accountability ladder on that? Kind of the first step is kind of say, am I someone stepping up and owning this issue, or am I finding excuses? Am I blaming others? Am I pointing in other directions? That's something you'll have to reflect on in the dishes case. How do you kind of move further along? How do you kind of say, oh, I need to actually get myself into the headspace where I'm finding solutions and I'm proposing those and I'm driving to get done. And then in addition to that, you can also help others. You can recognize when people you're working with are at those different stages. I mean, we've all done it. We've all known that moment where you're like, oh, she's really kind of casting blame here. She's pointing fingers. He's really in denial about the problem that we're facing. That's okay. It's not about kind of pointing that out to make them feel bad. It's more about recognizing that and then thinking about, well, what can I do to help get them to the point where they internalize and say, oh, we got to solve this problem. Here's how we can do it together. Here's how, solutions we can have. Here, I'm going to go take advantage of actually fixing it.
I would love to know about how I can tell my husband that he was making excuses.
Again, I don't know that this is the framework that's best for that, but what you might do is say, hey, where are we on the accountability ladder? And you might start by saying, here's where I am at. Here, I feel that I am taking ownership for this issue and I'm proposing solutions. Where do you think you're at? And that gives him a chance to kind of own it and really say, here's what I would do and here's how I would do it.
Interesting.
And the truth is, this is one of those things where at the lowest levels of trust, where you might not know someone very well, it might be a challenging situation. There, it's really about a tool for talking. Where are we at as a group? Hey, are we fixing this? Are we finding solutions? And lets people kind of come to their own conclusions. But in a high trust situation, hopefully one with your husband on the dishes, you might say, hey, I think you're kind of in the blame stage of blaming the dog for the bad dishes. And we kind of need to move into a stage where we acknowledge that we have these dishes and we need to get the dishes washed. And the only two people capable of doing that is one of us, not the dog. That's kind of the operational opportunity when you have those high degrees of trust in your group or amongst a set of people that are talking about that. And we know that teams do their best work when they can acknowledge and work together. This becomes a handy way to approach dealing with a challenge and recognizing our own accountability in it.
I mean, the example with my husband or the example of coffee with you, all of those are pretty easy examples. And I'm pretty sure having a conversation around that or making someone realize that they are doing the blame game or showing yourself that you need to hold accountability would be easy. But in an actual work situation, this conversation can kind of get tough, right?
Absolutely.
Because it would need a lot of guts also for few people, for some or most people to come up to someone and say something like this. So what would your thoughts be on that, as to what would your guidance be on that, specifically if there's one of your team members, you're a team lead, a manager of so many, if they want to come and tell you something, how do you think they should approach?
Well, one of the hardest things, of course, is if you're starting cold turkey with an issue, that's probably not the best time to introduce the accountability ladder. People might not be in the most receptive frame of mind. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about it on the show today was to give folks that opportunity to say, hey, you know what I might do? I might go and Google accountability ladder and send that around my team and say, hey, this is an interesting model for us to talk about. Because it's one of those things that you want to have shared and accepted a little bit first. If you've talked about it, you then have a common language. And the tool becomes really helpful when inevitably those challenging moments occur. And the more that you've invested in as a team having a shared understanding of that, the easier it is, especially when we're talking about it right now, when we're not talking about it because something massive has failed or blown up. It gives us an opportunity to kind of have a lower pressure environment, to kind of accept the concept and the ideas behind it. And then when the moment is right, to be able to use it. Might still require a little bit of courage, but at least you've got a common language for doing it. And people can say, yeah, I did like that concept. Gosh, where am I on it? Where are we on it? And what can we do to improve? Where can we bring ourselves up in that accountability ladder?
That was interesting. Awesome. Jason, I'm so happy you found the accountability ladder for this month.
I feel like that's a statement about me not taking accountability for something, but we'll unpack that on the next show.
Cool. So with this, we've come to the end of Sync Up. Thank you to our guest, Olga Dalecka. To learn more about OneDrive and the latest developments, please follow our tech community blog at aka.ms/OneDrive/blog.
And please do send us your questions and feedback. You can reach us on Twitter at OneDrive, at Jasmo, and at Ankita_Kirti21. And definitely visit our show page for links, resources, and more at aka.ms/syncup. That's SYNCUP. Subscribe to and follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy Sync Up, tell others what you've learned from the show, whether it's the exciting ways that you can have an accountability ladder and climb to success, or about how Add to OneDrive is going to make you and your employees more productive and more successful every single day. And if you're curious about other cool shows by Microsoft, go to aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts. There's something for everyone.
Thank you for listening to Sync Up, a show about OneDrive, the intelligent files app for Microsoft 365. We are your hosts, Ankita, Kirti, and Jason Moore. We'll catch up with you next month.